with the development of modern science, which really began in the 16th century, we get the development of the assumption that there is somehow a split in reality between subject and object.
Yes.
There are humans observing the world, and there is the world which they are observing.
Right.
And this dualism, this assumption that there is a division in reality between subject and object, goes all the way through our science and all the way through our philosophy, though in fact, contrary to what probably most Western men and women suppose, it's really a view of reality which is peculiar to the West and peculiar to the last 4 or 5 centuries.
Right.
Now, Descartes said his famed cogito. He went too far, though. He didn't say being is, he said I am. He referred to himself as the person. But where did the person come from? Descartes was simply wrong. Trying to reach the one thing that no one could ever deny, he says I am. But that has many qualities Descartes had no right to import. He wanted to get to the absolute, utter ground of existence, something that can never be falsified under any circumstance. He speaks about himself? This can't be the case. The only thing he could say is that something is. But that error of his was deadly for the West. Our concepts of egotism and individualism come from that error. This is the foundation of the ego in the West. This is where so many of our, really modern liberalism in its most vague sense comes from. Descartes was the breaking point. Descartes is the dividing line between medieval and modern.
And then a philosopher came along, high-powered enough to resist and overthrow the whole Plato-Descartes tradition, and that was Heidegger.
He believed that Western metaphysics had gone wrong for 2,500 years of falsity and inauthenticity in relation to the primal nature of being.
Heidegger isn't saying that these problems don't exist, but what he's saying is that this is not what is central to the human situation. We aren't, as it were, separate subjects looking through some invisible plate glass window at an objective reality which is out there. We are, from the beginning, in amongst it all. We are in there in the world, so to speak, and it's from there that we start.
You and I are together in the same world. I mean, you're not a mind attached to a body, and I'm not a mind attached to a body. Primarily, we're two human beings within the same world. So you asked me, how would you start introducing someone to Heidegger's philosophy? I would say you start with this fundamental concept of being in the world, that we are beings. Of course, now, the word being makes us recoil because it sounds very far-fetched and highfalutin. But in the primary cases, in this case, we have to understand it in the most mundane, factual, ordinary, everyday sense.
There is throughout Heidegger an emphasis on the everyday, on the ordinary, on the familiar.
Yes, in its familiar things, but there's also an emphasis on the extraordinary, the unusual.
And when Heidegger actually looked at the way human beings are related to the world, he found that it wasn't as subjects related to objects at all, that awareness and consciousness didn't play any role. Now that seems very strange. How could it be? Well, he took as his example, and he was good at going to simple examples, hammering. When an expert carpenter is simply hammering, if the hammer is working well and he's a master at what he's doing, the hammer becomes transparent for him. It isn't as if he's a subject contemplating the hammer. Maybe he's paying attention to the nails, but if the nails are going in well and he's really good and he's been doing it all day, he doesn't even have to pay attention to that. Or to take another of his favorite examples, he said to his students, when you come into the classroom, you must turn the doorknob, but you don't observe the doorknob, believe that you have to turn the doorknob to get in, try to turn the doorknob. All we know is here you are in the classroom and you couldn't have got here without turning the doorknob. You have no memory of it because the whole activity was so transparent it didn't even pass through consciousness. A driver has the same experience shifting from first to second. They do a lot of fancy footwork with the clutch, but they can be carrying on a deep philosophical conversation. It doesn't even have to be conscious. Heidegger calls that the ready to hand. When you look at our ready-to-hand relation to things, you just don't find subjects contemplating objects.
And they only shift out of this web of referentiality when something breaks. Say when a hammer breaks or a tool breaks, suddenly it stands out as a problem and it becomes conspicuous. Now it's a problem, it's shifted into a theoretical mode and I have to think about it. Now, the larger implication of that statement, notice, is that Heidegger says that the entire history of science has been the thinking of the world as a broken object. The entire world has been put into a theoretical phase space by the history of science and thought about as a problem, so that the entire world has become conspicuous as a broken thing, is what he's implying. Science has divorced itself from actuality by approaching the world as though it were a problem to be solved. It's not.
The way he put it was that philosophers since Descartes had been trying to prove the existence of the external world, and Kant said that it was a scandal that no one had successfully proved the existence of the external world. Heidegger says in Being and Time, it's a scandal that people are trying to prove the existence of the external world, as if we were stuck with this internal world and couldn't get out, whereas we are, as he puts it, being in the world.
I think it's quite important to emphasize, apropos of Heidegger, that his aim is descriptive. He is not a speculative metaphysician. He's not erecting any abstract speculative theory about what ultimate reality is.
Heidegger, despite his learning and erudition, has a kind of rural mentality and a kind of gut feeling world reaction against this city world construction that is so abstract that it's removed from reality, but has been the basic constitutive structure, of course, of philosophy of the metaphysical age since Plato, this abstractness.
In general, he would say, the whole philosophical tradition has passed over the world and our usual kind of involved coping with the world.
Skillful coping is being able to do things with your hands, like painting or handwriting or woodworking. Oh, sports is another swell example that you learn how to do. But when you are asked how you do it, you can't actually say, well, I'm trying to hit the ball. How am I trying to hit the ball? I don't know, I'm just swinging the bat. But not just swinging the bat, you may be talking to somebody who's really good at it.
So, in the world, orientation, remoting, and region are more important than this abstract, homogeneous way that science decontextualizes the world by laying an objective grid upon it. The friend who I see coming up the street might be closer to me than the very pavement underneath my feet. The glasses on my face may not be as close to me as the picture across the room on the wall is. So space is a subjective thing for Dasein, and it's oriented in terms of concern and care, not in terms of objectively measurable properties or distances. And I think today that with the triumph of globalization, what we do have is the complete triumph and covering of the Earth by this objective, homogeneous, neutral space of science, which is completely indifferent to where things are at. And as a result, you get a bunch of random objects that are thrown hither and yon, gas stations, parking lots, airports. It doesn't matter where anything is situated. And so you get the covering of the globe by this kind of neutral, nihilistic scientific space, which is objective, it's measurable, operates according to longitude and latitude, but it's completely value neutral and it's nihilistic, and you end up with an anti-world. Because this type of space, as Heidegger puts it, deprives the world of equipment, the ready-to-hand world, of its worldhood. we might say the human cultural world, the Dasein world, is deprived of its worldhood, and you get the creation of this anti-world, which is completely anathema and antithetical to the human world, in which it matters where things are at. And it's a threat to all worlds considered as regional, ethnic worlds that have cultural authenticity, art objects and places that have authenticity and historical auras to them. All that is wiped out by the anti-world of the homogeneous space of science, which is laid like a grid, like a Cartesian grid across the world.
Modern culture has suffered from an enormous mind-body split. I think if you can knit the mind and the body back together again in various subtle ways, great changes can occur.